You've done this today. You put on a different version of yourself the moment you walk into work. Your voice changed, your posture changed. Even your sense of right and wrong shifted just slightly to match the room you were standing in. You didn't notice. Most people never do. But in 1971, a psychologist built a basement experiment to prove exactly why that happens. And what he found was far stranger than anyone expected. Philip Zimbardo wanted to know something simple. Are people cruel because of who they are or because of where they're placed? So he took a group of ordinary college students, healthy, stable, screened for any sign of violence or instability. He flipped a coin for each one. Half became prisoners, half became guards. He turned the basement of Stanford's psychology building into a fake prison, with bars on the windows and numbers instead of names. The plan was to run the study for 2 weeks. It didn't make it past 6 days. Here's the part that still unsettles people. Within 24 hours, the guards stopped acting like students playing a role. They started acting like guards, real ones. They woke prisoners in the middle of the night for head counts. They forced them to do push-ups for no reason. One guard, given total anonymity behind mirrored sunglasses, began inventing punishments that weren't in any instructions he'd been given. Nobody told him to do that. The uniform did. And the prisoners changed too. Not because they were weak, because they were powerless. One broke down crying within 36 hours, sobbing so intensely that researchers had to remove him from the study. Others stopped resisting altogether. They started referring to themselves by their assigned numbers instead of their names. Think about that for a second. A number replaced an identity in less than 3 days. Why does this happen so fast? Zimbardo's answer was something psychologists now call deindividuation. When a person's sense of personal identity gets buried under a role, a uniform or a label, their usual moral compass gets quieter. Not gone, just quieter. The brain starts asking a different question. Instead of, what kind of person am I? It starts asking, what does someone in this position do? And it answers that question by looking around at the environment, not by looking inward. This wasn't an isolated theory. Around the same time, psychologist Stanley Milgram had already shown something just as disturbing. Ordinary people, told by an authority figure to deliver what they believed were painful electric shocks to a stranger, kept pressing the button. Not because they were sadists, because the situation permitted them, and the authority took the weight of responsibility off their shoulders. Zimbardo's prison study and Milgram's shock study became two of the most cited pieces of evidence that behavior bends to context far more than people like to admit. But here's where the story gets more complicated and more honest. For decades, the Stanford prison experiment was taught as if it proved that almost anyone placed in a position of power will become cruel. That's the version that went viral. That's the version turned into films and TV specials. But in 2018, French researcher Thibault Letexier dug through Zimbardo's original archive recordings and notes and found something the popular version had left out. The guards weren't just spontaneously turning evil. Some of them were coached. Recordings show a research staff member encouraging guards to be tougher on the prisoners, explicitly telling at least one to escalate. The cruelty wasn't purely emergent. Some of it was directed. Does that mean the experiment was meaningless? No. It means the real lesson is even more interesting than the original one. The Stanford prison experiment doesn't just show that situations can turn people cruel on their own. It shows how easily people will perform the role they think they're supposed to play, especially when someone with authority signals what that role should look like. The guards weren't simply corrupted by power. They were responding to invisible social cues about what a guard does. Cues coming from the researchers, from each other, from the uniform itself. That's not a less disturbing finding. It's arguably more disturbing because it means you don't need a villain pulling the strings. You just need a role, an audience, and a vague sense of what's expected. And that brings the story to you. You already live inside roles like this every single day. Think about how differently you act in a work meeting compared to a group chat with old friends. Think about how a normally calm person can become sharp-edged and defensive the moment they put on a referee's whistle, a manager's badge, or a moderator's title online. None of these are prisons. None of them has bars. But they all come with an invisible script. And most people follow that script without ever questioning where it came from. Social media is one of the clearest modern versions of this. Behind a username instead of a face, ordinary people say things they would never say standing in front of someone. That's de-individuation again, just running through fiber optic cable instead of a basement hallway. The anonymity of the guard's sunglasses has been replaced by the anonymity of a profile picture. The mechanism is identical. Strip away identity, hand someone a role, and watch the personality become secondary to the part being played. Even something as mundane as a job title can do this. Psychologists have observed that people given even a small amount of authority, like the power to approve or deny something, start unconsciously adjusting their empathy downward toward the people they have power over. Not out of malice, out of a kind of mental shortcut. The brain treats decision maker and person to be evaluated as two separate categories, and it starts protecting the first category at the expense of the second. So what do you do with this? Awareness is genuinely the first defense because de-individuation depends on you not noticing it's happening. The moment you can name the pattern, I'm acting like the role expects me to, not necessarily like myself, the spell weakens. Zimbardo himself, decades after the study, became an advocate for what he called the banality of heroism. The idea that the same situational forces that can push someone toward cruelty can be redirected to push someone toward courage and decency if the environment rewards that instead. That reframing matters. The lesson isn't that humans are secretly monsters waiting for the right basement. The lesson is that humans are remarkably responsive to context, for better or worse, and the people who built the context in 1971 nudged it toward the worse. Build a different context with different expectations modeled by the people in charge, and the same instinct to conform to a role can produce remarkable kindness instead. Hospitals, schools, and military units that train explicitly for compassionate authority see exactly this kind of shift in the way new staff and recruits behave within weeks. There's also a quieter, more personal question buried in all of this. How many roles are you wearing right now without realizing it? The version of you at work, the version of you online, the version of you around your family. Each one comes with its own unspoken rules about how much warmth, how much sharpness, how much patience is appropriate. None of those versions are fake exactly, but none of them is the whole picture either. They're costumes your environment handed you, and most of the time, you put them on without even checking the mirror. So tonight, when you put on whichever costume the day requires, the work voice, the parent voice, the customer service voice, pause for 1 second before you do it. Ask the question that Zimbardo's experiment never let its subjects ask in time. Is this who I am, or is this just who the room expects me to be? You've done this today, and you'll do it again tomorrow. The only difference now is that you'll know it's happening.